Climbing Gold is a production of Duct Tape and Beer, with support from the North Face. Never stop exploring. Dr. Squatch, get dirty, stay clean. Chorus, explore perfection. An Element, restoring health through hydration.
Alex, there are so many strong climbers out there. Does it ever sort of blow your mind how much the limits of the sport, like the strength of athletes, has progressed in the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, it is very impressive. In a way, it hasn't surprised me that much because I've been in the middle of it the whole time and you're just surrounded by the constant news and whatever else. But then every once in a while I step back and I think that when I was a kid, climbing V12 was the hardest thing in the world. And now I'm like, man, climbing V12 is stupid nowadays. Like, it's just not even like everybody climbs V12. Like, who doesn't climb V12? You know, it's crazy.
Me, but
well,
yes.
Yeah, me too, sadly. But
yeah, there is this sort of been an explosion in strength that's happened, through training, through the raw numbers of climbers participating in the sport. The people we'd say are mentally strong climbers. Do you think that has increased at the same level as people we would just say are mutantly strong?
Well, it depends what we mean by mentally strong, really, because if you mean managing to deal with fear and climb dangerous routes, then I think that has certainly lagged behind the physical progress that we've seen in terms of grades. But I do think that there's a mental side to climbing hard routes. And in that respect, I think that we've probably seen tremendous improvement mentally as well, just because you can't climb the hardest routes in the world without having a pretty solid mental game in some way. So I don't know. I think that there definitely has been a lot of improvement on that front. It's just less obvious.
We all know that climbing is a physical endeavor, but we often forget the mental side. It impacts almost every side of the sport, whether you feel like you belong, how you approach it. Today, friend of the show, Jonathan Siegrist, joins us with producer Lauren Delani Miller and Lisi Hendricks to talk about mind games.
Jonathan Siegrist is no stranger to climbing gold. He's been a guest a few times before, but for those that don't remember, he's one of the strongest climbers in the world. He's put up many of the hardest sport routes in the country. He's consistently ranked among the highest on ADA.NU. He has a new film out called Passion, in which you basically see him climb a lot of the hardest routes in the world, and it just looks insane. He looks very, very strong the whole time. It's a really beautiful film. And he just set another 5:15 this week, so, what hasn't he done?
And it's interesting because even though, like, by all the metrics, Jonathan is one of the best, he doesn't always feel like that. And I think that's so indicative of what sort of the mind games we have to deal with and work through as climbers.
Let's dive in. I'm Alex Honnold.
I'm Fitz Cahall.
This is Climbing Gold.
Nailed it.
We should do, this is the therapy session of Climbing Gold.
Yes. Free therapy.
Yeah.
You guys like over-the-ear headphones instead? I do have normal headphones, but...
No, it's all going to work. We're all good.
All right, great.
Are you feeling imposter syndrome about your
yeah.
Podcasting?
Podcasting? Yeah, definitely.
Jonathan, you have a new film out. Tell us a story about like how it came to be, because I think this kicks us off into a pretty interesting conversation.
It was the first time in my life that I've ever had like a larger budget film. Arc'teryx wanted to give me some real money to make a movie, and they gave me a lot of creative freedom. And I found a director and videographer, Ryan White, who I was able to work with, who like we saw eye to eye, and I absolutely loved his editing style and his filming and everything. And we like very much aligned 100%. And it was such an awesome process working on it with him. I was at an Arc'teryx Athlete Summit a couple of years ago, and I was chatting with a bunch of the skiers and snowboarders, and they kept saying this phrase like, we're clipping up, we're clipping up, we're clipping up. And what that means is basically like, and this is the same thing in skateboarding, which is kind of what I grew up with. And that is that like throughout the whole year, what you're doing is you're making clips, right? And that means that you're like landing tricks, or you're going to a new spot. Like you're repeatedly doing your sport, and you're having videographers come with you to try and capture cool moments that happen over the course of the whole year. And the film that we made is largely modeled off of that idea. And that is that like, it's a year of climbing. There's essentially no talking. There's no talking heads. There's no interviews. There's no story other than the inherent story of just like hustling and climbing as much as I can and being at the cliff. So that was what the model was. And then there were other things about the film and kind of points that we wanted to try and make with the film that emanated then after that. It's something really different, I think. And I hope people enjoy watching it.
You have had this incredibly prolific career. We're talking a little bit about imposter syndrome today. Has it surprised you that this is the first opportunity you've had to do something bigger?
Kind of, but okay, so year is 2010. I climbed my first 9A in 2010. And, I was really hustling. My like breakout event, I guess, was going to the Red River Gorge in the fall of 2009. That was like when most people learned who I was. And I ended up winning a golden piton from Climbing Magazine, which is still the one and only award I've ever won. And I'm so proud of it because it's a physical thing that I have in my house and it's really cool. Alex, you didn't know anything about having physical awards in your house, but it's pretty neat.
I've got a golden piton as well, a physical, real thing.
Yeah, actually, what's funny is we won it the first, your first one, because I think you have like 7, but your first one and my first one was the same year. Did you know that? Yeah, 2009.
I could see that. We're both. And for fun fact, we're the exact same age for listeners.
That's true.
So, we're just on the same trajectory.
We're born only a couple weeks apart. The only difference is that he has 2 children.
Yeah. And so now I have the body of a 58-year-old man.
So that's all just to say that there was this moment in my career in the beginning when I wanted to pursue climbing. I was having some success. I think it was like the spring of 2011 or the summer of 2011. At that point, I had climbed like a couple 9As. I had, on paper, I felt like I was standing out amongst other climbers in the US. And I wasn't getting paid a cent. Like I didn't have a paying contract until the end of 2011. And it came a time, like I graduated college in 2009. I was borrowing money, not even borrowing. My dad was helping support me. He could like see that my vision and my dream was like worthy of supporting. He was a climber himself. And I think he took a lot of pride out of like me pursuing this thing. So he gave me $500 a month. I was a route setter at the Boulder Rock Club. I worked I'd normally work for 3 months and then I'd go on the road and live in my truck for 3 months. And then in 2011, I officially moved into my truck and moved out of my apartment in Boulder. So I was just like living in my truck. And there was like a clear moment then when I felt deserving of something that I wasn't receiving. And I basically said to myself, like, look, I gave it a really good shot. I'm going to work really hard this year. And like, if I can't get any money next year, like I'm going to get a real job, basically. Because honestly, by that point, my parents were kind of like, all right, it's been 2 years. Like, like it's cool that you're getting like shoes and stuff, but, probably should think about like a job because they also helped put me through college. And so, I can totally understand where they're coming from. Your son has this dream and he gets like maybe in the newspaper once. And so they're like, holy shit, this could be crazy. But then like 2 years later, when he's still like, like living like a total homeless person and like literally has made not a single penny from rock climbing, you're kind of like, okay, like maybe it's time to give up. So to answer your question, like there have been moments where I've felt a certain way, but like, I actually generally just don't think that attitude is helping me achieve what I really want to achieve. Like, I've seen other climbers lean in heavily to this idea that they're deserving of something that they're not receiving. And I don't necessarily think that attitude and that like perception of the world helps them ultimately achieve what it is that they're after. And I think in part learning from observing that. And I think also just in part, like, I don't want to live with that feeling all the time because that's not a cool feeling to live with. I'd way rather just wake up and maybe I have a moment of being like, oh, it'd be cool if like somebody cared about what I was doing. But I care way more about whatever my next objective is than I do about like stewing over the fact like for too long that maybe like I should have gotten a few more likes on my photo or whatever, like stuff like that, or gotten like should get paid $5,000 more per year or whatever it is. So at the end of the day, like for me, it was always just about climbing, and having the opportunity to climb and travel. And like for a long time, it was just breaking even. And even that felt like a total win. And so I like overarching sentiment is immense gratitude. And like, I recognize that I probably have like legit one of the best jobs you could ever imagine having. And I just feel grateful like every day. So I don't get too worked up about that.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you belong at this stage? Like, we are chatting about that imposter syndrome, but like compared to some other people, like, do you feel like you belong in the upper tier, or like at the sort of utmost level? Because there's a lot of data that would say you sure as hell do. I mean, namely some of the freaking things you were climbing in your film. But yeah, do you feel like you belong, or do you ever kind of feel like haunted by those older feelings?
No, I definitely feel like I don't belong, but yeah, I think it's all just a balance. Like there are a lot of moments where I feel like I know that I'm way less talented and way weaker than so many of my quote unquote peers. But then there are moments when I'm like, well, the sport's big enough that not everyone can be as strong as Adam Ondra, and there's enough like room for people to tell their story that aren't the strongest climber in the world, so that could be me, like to a normal person, they might see like me and Alex Megos in the same category, but there's no comparison between the two of us. Like there's not even close. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm probably as close to Megos is as like your average teenager who goes to the climbing gym like once a week is to me.
Yeah, like me.
That's not true. No, I was going to say me to Jonathan is like Jonathan to Alex Megos. Where you're
maybe that's
some of the same routes. That's actually probably sort of close.
Are you saying Alex is like an
kinda...
average teenager in the gym? Yeah.
yeah. I'm like actually I'm probably worse than a lot of teenagers in the gym now.
I still like I find this interesting because if you truly think about it, like it's not like you can think of or name many people that have climbed routes that are, much harder. That like there's not a ton of people on that list that are climbing way harder than you. It's not like there's hundreds of people above you and you're just like down in the pack. It's like you're number 4 on 8A. You are a talented, very gifted rock climber. Also, the breadth of the hard routes that you climbed is much greater than a lot of the people that have climbed harder routes than you. I see that as like it being hard for you to, like it is for all of us, to accept that you are a high performer and that you are in the top of the pack,
Jonathan, did you know just now before Lisi said it what your 8A.NU rating was? I'm just curious.
Yeah, because it used to be number 1. Surely he knows that, or was it number 2 for a while? So surely he knows that it slipped a tiny bit.
I was number 1. It was a proud moment. I think I screen capped it. It lasted for like 72 hours.
but you were there,
You were there.
It was because Ondra was on vacation and probably had forgotten to log things for the last like 3 weeks or something. And I just had this like momentary moment of like pure bliss. And now, back down where I belong around number 3 or 4.
We'll be back with more after the break. I've been a North Face athlete for almost 18 years, which has been incredible, and I've always appreciated their commitment to exploration. Summit Series is the name of the pinnacle North Face products that I use on every expedition, and I love that their tagline is athlete tested and expedition proven. I've personally tested these products all over the world, and they've always proven themselves. Future Fleece is the next generation base layer that I wear almost every day of climbing outside, whether on the wall or at the crag. You can shop the full Summit Series collection at thenorthface.com. Dr. Squatch crafts natural, high-performance personal care products with no harmful ingredients. I don't shower often, but when I do, I use Dr. Squatch. I especially like the Wood Barrel Bourbon Bar Soap. From soap to shampoo to conditioner, they help me look, feel, and smell my best for whatever adventure I choose. They're offering new customers 20% off any purchase with the code ClimbingGold. Or you can go to drsquatch.com/climbinggold. The link's in the show notes. Dr. Squatch. Get dirty, stay clean. So imposter syndrome is when you get some kind of external accolades and you feel like you don't deserve them, right? I mean, you've achieved some kind of success, but on the inside, you feel like you don't deserve that success for whatever reason. But I'm sort of curious because in your case, Jonathan, I feel like it's actually the opposite of imposter syndrome in that you've achieved, like you've done tons and tons of hard things without receiving the accolades that you perhaps deserve for some of those hard things. And so in some ways, it's like the opposite configuration from standard imposter syndrome. You know what I mean? Because like normally when people talk about imposter syndrome, it's like they get promoted in their job. They're like, now I'm the boss, but I don't feel like the boss. But like in your case, you are the boss in terms of, having put up the hardest routes in the country and, many of, and whatever, you can list things in whatever way you want. And like, you certainly have the resume to back up the claim that, you're the strongest sport climber in the US right now. Basically, you can frame it however you want, but like there's a tremendous CV behind it. Like you've done a lot of things, but you just haven't gotten the public accolades around those things as much. And so in some ways that's the inverse of a standard imposter syndrome scenario, isn't it? Or am I misunderstanding?
Well, we should just ask him a question. Are you the boss, Jonathan?
I'm not the boss. I'm not the boss.
And to be fair, though, literally no climber would say they're the boss. If you ask Chris Sharma, Chris Sharma is the boss, but he would never say it. You know what I mean? Like, he would say that, like, oh, there's so many young kids who are so much stronger than me. And even if you asked Alex Megos or somebody, he'd be like, well, I'm terrible at onsighting and other people are better, even though he onsighted, whatever. Like, he would claim his own weaknesses. It's like every climber is aware of their own weaknesses. And like no climber is going to say like Adam Onder would never call himself the boss, even though he's arguably the greatest rock climber of all time.
What I was trying to say is that early in my career, I had this feeling of like, oh, I'm so awesome. Why aren't I achieving? Why, from a professional standpoint, like why don't I have money? Like why do I still have to work a job? Like all the XYZ stuff. And then I think that as I've learned more over the course of 12 or 13 years, now, even though I might have some of those things that I wanted back then, I'm much more like, my attitude is much more just like feeling immensely grateful for what I have as opposed to feeling like I want more.
It's funny, that phenomenon you brought up is the Dunning-Kruger. I don't know how many of you have heard that, but that's actually like the name of it. And it is that exact same phenomenon of basically...
It's something to the effect that if you're a Gumby, you think you're the man.
Yeah.
Did he say no one's more confident than a bro that just climbed his first 512? Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, exactly. So it's true. No, it's the first rule of Dunning-Kruger Club is you don't know you're a member of Dunning-Kruger Club.
Oh, that's amazing.
Not knowing the scope of your own ignorance is part of the human condition. The problem with it is that we see it in other people, but we don't see it in ourselves. And
totally.
The interesting side of the Dunning-Kruger is like when they first identified it, and they did it, through academic research, and they, wrote many papers about it. But they also saw the inverse: is that highly competent people, they're much more likely to say they aren't good at something. They're much more likely to be like, oh, I'm actually not that good, or to actually believe they aren't as good. Yeah.
Dude, you know where you really see that is at the ping pong table. Because I've discovered that if you ask somebody if they're any good at ping pong, and they're like,
true.
I've played. If someone's just casually like, oh, I've played a couple times, you're like, oh, that person's really good. But if someone's like, yeah, I love ping pong, let's go, then you're like, they're probably kind of medium. It's like,
I feel exposed.
Yeah. But there is something to like, you need to even know what it's like to be like for Jonathan to explain that like the difference between him and Megos is like so much bigger than like your average climber would probably understand. Like I was having dinner with friends last week and one of them was saying to the other like, oh, but you're such a good skier. And she's like, you only think I'm a good skier because I'm one of the best skiers, but like I just got back from Chamonix and I can tell you that I'm not a good skier. But like you need to like reach that upper level to even see like how good is good. And that like, and I think in climbing, it's interesting because there's like, you're having this feeling in that upper echelon, whereas I feel like so many climbers would be like, I can't believe Jonathan has imposter syndrome when he's like the fourth best climber in the world or whatever sort of ranking, undeniably one of the best. Like it's hard to understand from not being in that kind of elite community, how you could reach that level and then still feel that way. And I think part of it is that you've seen like the people that you actually consider to be the best, like doing what they do. And you're like, oh, I can't do that. And it's just really interesting to see from like the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of it comes down to the community you're in too. And, you know, like if you're in a community where the person, you know, that climbs the hardest is 12A and everyone else climbs 510, then you're like, I'm the best climber. I'm a great climber, you know? But if you're in a community where all of your friends are professional rock climbers and they all climb 515 and you climb 513, then you feel like you suck. So
are you speaking from personal experience?
Yeah, are you talking about yourself, Lizzie?
Yeah. So I think there is something to do with that too, you know?
But yeah, I think it totally matters like who you're surrounded with. Like I feel like I've been lucky in my climbing career to have so many friends that are so talented and so good. But then yeah, I always feel like, no, I super suck at climbing, you know, because I'm like trying to keep up with friends. Like even, you know, I'm on Yosar, but you're like, but I only, you know, have climbed El Cap however many times, and I can't lap it twice in a day or 3 times in a day like some of the people I work with can, which means I'm like totally garbage. Whereas like you're just really looking at like a really specific group there. Or like I just went to the Tagia Gorge in Morocco and was like,
You just went to Tagia?
yeah, it was horrible. I was like, no one told me like how hard and how scary it is, and that there'd be so many Spanish climbers there making me feel horrible about myself.
Really, I love Tagia. I thought it was so cool.
Well, of course, you think that the bolts are super spaced out, which doesn't matter to you, and all of the climbing requires sporty. Like really run out 5'11" and climbing at a minimum, which is fine. But I like for me that's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, the harder ones require really run out 512 climbing, which is probably just as demanding for me. Like, I think at your respective level, that place is challenging for everyone. You're like, wow, it's pretty scary.
I do think that's true. I mean, and it was amazing, but definitely you're like, I can't tell here if I have imposter syndrome or if I'm actually just like not really, like, shouldn't be here. You know, like, do I actually just, like, it's hard to separate the difference between feeling like I shouldn't be here and actually being like, oh, I don't actually know if I have the skills to do the thing that I'm trying to do now.
Totally.
And I don't know if it's like, I feel like imposter syndrome is based on, no, there's evidence to the contrary. You really can do it. And I feel like so many times in my climbing, I've been like, I don't know the difference between imposter syndrome and actually just being like, this is kind of over my head.
Well, in the case of Tagia, the question would be, did you take any 50-foot whippers while trying to get to the next bolt? Because in that case, it would be a well-founded and totally justified sense of, not belonging there. Whereas if you made it up the routes you were trying, but you were just really scared the whole time, then you're like, you know what, you do belong there. That's just part of the experience. That's what everybody has when they go there.
Right, totally.
So did you take any devastatingly large whippers?
No, because I made my husband lead like everything.
Oh, so you didn't even find out. So you're never even going to know if it was imposter syndrome or not. That's disappointing.
I do think this is like a super interesting point though, Lauren, because I feel like I've struggled with that a lot. And I've seen both Alex and Jonathan struggle with that, when they've been trying hard routes and they've been like, can I not do this? Or is it like the conditions? Or am I, I think I've seen you guys both deal with that. Like the difference between like, can I actually do this? Am I ready to do this right now? Or am I just not doing it circumstantially? Yeah.
You know something interesting, J-Star, that I overheard you talking to Chris Sharma about the other day was with really hard projecting, where if you knew from the very beginning that you would eventually do something, then it would be easy to put in the time and put in the effort, and you would have no problem just grinding through the whole season or whatever. Like if you knew in your heart of hearts that it would eventually happen, then it's not that hard to put in the effort. But the real challenge is when you don't know, when there's the uncertainty involved, and you're kind of like, well, what if I don't have it? And I think, Lisi, that's kind of what you're getting at in terms of imposter syndrome. It's like when you let that voice of doubt creep in, that's when it suddenly all starts to feel a lot harder. Because like if you know on the inside that you're eventually going to do it, then you're like, yeah, you can put in the time, you can put in the effort, like you will make it happen eventually. But it's when you start to ask yourself, like, am I capable of this? Like, can I ever do this? Does this exceed my grasp? Like that's when it's really hard to continue.
Totally. And I mean, there's a lot of like mental aspects involved with all of that, because my most recent project that I was trying, it was the kind of situation where like I was pretty confident by the end that I could climb it. Like I had the physical ability to climb it, but the season was closing and I could see that the heat was coming and that like I only had a handful of days left. And so I put a lot of pressure on myself to climb the route in that remaining time period that I had. But I could relieve all that pressure if I just told myself, well, there's always next season, you know, and if I was genuinely okay with not sending, with like having to wait until next season, then an immense amount of pressure could have been relieved. But, you know.
But so why didn't you say that? Because obviously had the weather come sooner and you hadn't had an opportunity, you would have just done it the next season. And we all know that. And so I'm kind of like, why not tell yourself that? Because in a way, that's just reality. You know, like had it started to rain and the route got wet, you'd be like, okay, I'll do it in the fall. And it's like no biggie.
Yeah, well, I think that this is like comes to the core of performing as an athlete at your absolute best. I see like preparation and years of experience is what molds the body, but ultimately what separates you from doing your absolute best is like the way that you approach things mentally. I don't think that you can do your absolute best unless you take something really seriously, and that means like potentially making sacrifices, you know, thinking about it when you're not climbing, like, you know, whatever that means, stretching, eating right, et cetera, et cetera. Like you have to take it seriously, but you have to also find a balance between taking something very, very seriously and almost letting it go to some extent, because too much pressure isn't going to help you, but not enough pressure. And that's that's what's hard in being a human throughout like all aspects of life, is the gray area, or like the balance, like finding the balance. Like if all you had to do was go super extreme to one way or the other, like I don't give a shit about climbing, I'm never putting my climbing shoes on again, and that would somehow make you send, that'd be pretty easy for a lot of people. And I also think that for a lot of like young, like psycho gym crushers, they could also go to the maximal extreme of caring too much and like focusing on something and hyper analyzing and like being like hyper psyched on something all the time. And I actually think that that works against you too. And so finding that middle ground is what's like so incredibly hard about like doing your best. And so to answer your question, it would have been easy for me to just convince myself, you know, whatever, I'll just like do it next season. But like, would I have like hustled to get out there on the days when the temps weren't like perfect, but maybe doable? Or would I have like, you know, woken up in the middle of the night and like redressed like a cut that I had on my finger because I got up to pee and I figured, oh, why not? I'm already up. Like, you know, it's those little extra pieces that may have aided me, maybe not. But, you know, it's just hard to find that balance basically between like letting something go and also being like 100% like dedicated to something.
But the question is, do you think that adding all that extra pressure on yourself actually helps? Because like, so in this case, with this specific project that you were working this season, you know, you can imagine a different world in which you only went out there on the decent days, you let it go till the fall if that's the way it played out, but then you also worked on some of your new projects at the 5G or something, like random crags, like local crags. And realistically, that probably just would mean that you'd send both projects in the fall, and your overall year, you know, your overall tick list would be the same. It would just be slightly different timing, and your overall level of fitness would wind up being the same. And so like long term, you're kind of like, it's basically all playing out the same. Do you need the enormous personal stress?
I guess my question to you would be,
and actually, and I would ask your wife, like, does Shayna think you need the enormous personal stress? Because that's the real, you know, because it's like, yeah, if it helps you send, and you know, I'm not trying to project too much, because obviously I've like done the same mind games with myself with soloing and with all kinds of things where you're like, you know, this matters, I'm going to do this thing, and you're kind of like, does it freaking matter? Like, do you need to put that on yourself?
I can say that I think it does matter for me. And the main reason why I say that is because I've been climbing for long enough that I've kind of seen the trends. I've seen the way that I perform under too much stress, which is definitely not a good thing. I've also seen the way that I perform under too little stress. And I think I would ask you, like, think about the best climbers in the world, and would you characterize them as generally having some level of stress in their life or being stress-free? Chris Sharma cannot be included.
Notable
in this.
exception.
Notable exception.
Yeah, but so
he's notable. Yeah.
Except, so if you exclude Chris Sharma, then yeah, most of the best climbers in the world are complete psychos. But, you know, are like totally neurotic or like putting way too much stress on themselves. And, you know, myself included, I suppose. But But I don't know. But then you add a couple people like Chris. I'm sure there are other people like him. I'll have to think about it more. But they're definitely. Oh, what about like Sean Rabitou? I mean, come on. Sean and Chris are two extreme outliers where they just give no Fs and they're just the best climbers in the world. So they're kind of like, it's obviously not required.
Let's say that randomly, even though there were a few decent weather days in the schedule, and you put all the circumstances were the same for your last project, right? Like you were trying hard, you're waking up in the middle of the night, you're fixing your finger, etc. But the weather comes in earlier, you don't send. How do you feel about yourself? Like no fault of your own.
Yeah.
You could definitely send the route. Does that impact your view of how you are as a climber, how you perform?
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the reason that I can say that with confidence is because that's how my last season went.
Yeah.
I had 3 projects in a row that two really particularly. The third one, I kind of was just blown out emotionally. So I kind of gave up, if I'm honest. But weather played a small part in that. But the first 2 were like kind of things where I was like, one in particular, the one that I care about the most, I fell at the anchor, like literally on the very last move going to the anchor of like a 45-meter route. And then the following day it rained and it was wet for the rest of the season. Like it was my actual last opportunity to send that season. And if I had 2 or 3 more good weather days, who knows? Like that's something you learn, I think, when you're really deep into this pursuit, is that you can never count your eggs before they hatch. Like I can't tell you how many times I've been like, oh, I just need 2 more days, and then you actually need 10, but let's imagine that I only needed a couple more. So there's nothing, it was completely out of my control as to whether or not at that point, whether or not I could send. But yeah, I was upset. I was bummed, and I think that that's totally normal. I don't necessarily think that this is constructive, but I do think that I made that into a way to feel like it was due to my performance and not to the circumstances.
We'll be back with more after the break. I first found Coros when I was looking for a GPS watch that could track my biggest outdoor adventures. I needed something with a massive battery life that was also robust enough to handle the climbing. As it turns out, Coros is the only GPS watch brand that has done some serious development for climbers, from multi-pitch GPS tracking to indoor programmed workouts. The watches have a mind-blowing battery life. Their Vertex watch series lasts for more than 100 hours in GPS activities, so I only need to charge it once every several weeks. I only need to charge my watch so sporadically that I can never find the charger because I haven't used it in 6 weeks. If you're interested in bringing new technology into your climbing training and tracking, you should consider their new Vertex 2S. Go to Coros.com and use the code ClimbingGold to secure a free watch carabiner with the purchase of your new Vertex 2S. The link's in the show notes. Element is a zero-sugar electrolyte drink mix formulated with a science-backed ratio of sodium to potassium to magnesium. Each packet delivers a meaningful dose of electrolytes, free of sugar, artificial colors, or other dodgy ingredients. It tastes great, and I've used it extensively on expeditions. Element is formulated for anyone looking to restore health through hydration, and is perfectly suited for athletes, folks who are fasting, or those following keto, low-carb, whole food, or paleo diets. Try Element totally risk-free. If you don't like it, they'll refund your order, no questions asked. So whether you're new or returning Element customer, you can get a free Element sample pack with any drink mix order when you go to drinkelement.com/climbinggold. That's drinklmnt.com/climbinggold. The link's in the show notes.
Jonathan, I'm curious, that perceived delta, that gap between you and Megos or you and Andra, right? To most of us, it's barely perceptible, right? It's such a small thing. I mean, maybe other super, super elite climbers would be like, oh yeah, maybe I see that gap. But do you ever feel like that perceived gap changes the project you select? Like, could you be going and trying one grade harder, at that absolute, the 15C or the 15D level? Like, do you feel like that your perceived gap between those people who you say is higher actually changes what you might select as a project?
I remember someone saying a long time ago, I think it was in 2008 when Chris climbed Jumbo Love, that they were like, dude, Chris just climbed 9B and we all just got a little bit stronger. You know, because I think like the bar just got raised, you know, so there's like this attitude of like everybody, there's like more room to grow all of a sudden. To answer your question, I think that generally no, but primarily the reason I say that is because I don't choose my objectives based on like a way of feeling competitive with another climber. I have always wanted to do the best that I can do. And I'm just obsessed with this process of like something feeling impossible or something feeling on the edge of being impossible. And then, you know, going through that personal transformation, be it physical or mental, to get to a place where it is possible, you know? It doesn't feel that much in relationship to like what the best climbers in the world are doing, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Well, but
I don't know.
Regardless of what the best climbers in the world are doing, why not just go try the hardest routes in the world? And I mean, you've done a lot of the sort of hardest routes in the world, but I mean, but you know, there are like at least a dozen routes that are the hardest in the world that you haven't actually tried. Like, why not just go try them?
Well, I've tried 2 of the hardest routes in the world.
Bibliography and
Direct Jumbo.
Oh, that's yeah, okay, whatever. You gave that freaking 2 burns on the bottom. That's not
oh,
really,
you mean like try, like honestly? Yeah, but
even trying, actually, even that counts to some extent. Like go to Flatinger and like go up change and just see how the moves feel. Like see if you fit the box well, or like try move and see if you fit the box. You know, things like that. Like go up silence once and be like, cool, toe hooks. I love hanging from toe hooks. You know, like weird stuff like that.
I'm at a point in my climbing career where I'm trying to decide if I want to try to climb 9B plus, which is 15C. And furthermore, if I can climb 9B plus. And like you would look at the pyramid and you would think like, oh yeah, but I think that, you know, like the example that you had earlier, Alex, of like, you know, there's like, I think just the amount of difficulty that you have to add to 9B to get 9B plus is astronomically greater. Like the grade, the acceleration of grades is not linear. It takes.
Well, no, it probably is linear, but it feels exponential when it's close to your actual limits. Because I mean, I experienced the same thing at my limits, where it's like,
right,
you know, I have my physical limit, and then to go the tiny step beyond that, you're like, oh, now it feels insanely hard.
Yeah.
But for somebody who's way beyond that, it feels linear.
Right. Exactly. Like if I look at like for me personally, like, you know, 12C to 12D, it feels like an obvious gradual step. But when I think about the difference between like 9A and the perceived effort of like 14D, 9A versus 15A versus 15B, like it's dramatic.
It goes
like
exponential.
It feels like 9B to me feels more than twice as hard as 9A, probably 3 times as hard. If I think of it that way, and I think about like, you know, trying a 9B plus and it potentially being 3 times as hard as a 9A plus, I'm like, well, I could maybe do that, you know? I think that for me, the main thing is just, I think that if I have a physical limit, it's probably 9B plus. And therefore, like finding my perfect condition mentally, physically, and then also finding like the route that suits me the best is probably my best way to like move forward with that, you know?
I don't know. I was thinking about this the other day. I went running with a professional runner on the Black Diamond team, Joe Grant, who is awesome. And I went for a 2-hour run with him. And it struck me that running is an interesting sport, and that no matter how much you want to be good or try or whatever, on any given day, like effort is not going to help you, basically. Like he was so far beyond my level that like at any point he could have just run away from me casually and been like, bye. And there, like, no amount of effort on my part could have kept me with him, like, no matter what. And it made me think about that in climbing, because there is a sort of gulf between certain levels where I'm like, for me, no amount of effort will get me up a V14 boulder problem. Because it's just way too beyond like what my fingers can do. And not to say that I couldn't maybe train for 2 years and like work toward it. And like if I devoted myself, I'm like, yeah, maybe one day I could conceivably climb by V14. I don't want to say that's like beyond me. If I found a really soft one that was endurance-y and whatever, you know, like maybe it's possible with enough knee bars, and who knows.
But you're saying if you went to try Esperanza right now, there's nothing you could do. Yeah, I totally.
I can't even interface with the holds. You know, like certain V14s, like I wouldn't even be able to touch the crux holds. Like I can't hang them. I can't pull my weight off the ground.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of like, there's a gulf there where you're like, no amount of wishful thinking and like self-belief or positive self-talk will allow me to hang on these crimps. You know, it's like, there's just no, like my fingers aren't strong enough. And so I don't know, I'm sort of like, yeah, I mean, I think you should try harder routes. That said, there are certain things that are just beyond all of us where you're like, well, you know, like, I don't know. And that might be a product of climbing having grown so much, you know, over our lifetimes. Because I feel like 15 years ago, like when we were sort of starting, you're like, you know, the climbing world feels a little smaller, like everything was a little bit more in touch, where you're like, oh, the hardest grade in the world is V14. I'm like, yeah, I could imagine that one day, maybe. But now I'm like, V17? No, like we're not imagining that. That's like, that ship sailed. Like neither of us is ever climbing V17.
No,
like it's just not, like it's just no chance. And so, I don't know. It's the interesting thing where I'm sort of like, yeah, I'm all for like try harder routes, go big, try hard. But at a certain point, you do have to face the reality that like there are certain things that neither of us will ever do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like to come full circle on the whole conversation, I think that for me, I've been encouraged by the fact that I'm 38 years old and I actually do physically feel stronger than I was a couple years ago, which is really cool. Like, and I feel on an upward trajectory physically. You know, am I going to make an enormous breakthrough at 40 after pushing myself for 20 years? Probably not. You know, like I bet I can squeak another 5% out of my body, or 10% maximal. But am I going to jump in the same way that I did in my mid 20s? Like, no, like there's very little proof of that being something that's possible. But, you know, maybe if it was possible, that'd be sweet. But so knowing that I'm probably within, let's say 10% of like my physical maximum, I think for me, the main things to consider and the main like roadblocks to me potentially doing my absolute best physically are mental. And largely, I think that would be two things. One, am I willing to live in this space of feeling like an imposter for a while, right? Like, am I willing to go to a crag and try something that's clearly like just above me for a while and kind of deal with what that represents? And two, am I willing to, commit to that thing in a way where, you know, I could be 40 years old, you know, 2 years from now, and it's like my entire schedule for the whole year is based around like these 2 seasons that I'm trying this thing, that I'm like, you know, making sacrifices even more so potentially than I am already to climb. And how might that affect like my, like, you know, job, like, you know, career type stuff? How might that affect my relationship that I'm in, or the level of comfort that I live with day to day and stuff like that? So those are the things that I think I need to kind of go to, like, you know, go to war with, or come to like set up to bat with, as opposed to like the physical aspect. Cause like Alex said, I mean, I do feel like I can wring a little bit more out of my body and out of my abilities, but like, you know, barring some kind of like enormous scientific achievement in cell regeneration or something like that, like I'm probably pretty close to what my maximum could be. That would be my guess, but I don't know. I'd love, if you're a trainer and you really think I'm wrong and you want to get in touch with me and give me some free consultation, you should. My phone number is in the show notes.
Whose number should we put in the show notes? That'd be hilarious. Does anyone have anyone to take revenge on?
Cedar Wright. Cedar Wright. He'd be psyched. He'd be like, man, all these nice people have been calling me up and offering training advice. I'm so fired up.
They're like, dude, you can get stronger. You're not too old. You've got this, man. This is this is your moment. Cedar would be like, holy shit, who is this?
Yeah. Cedar would be like, wait, so even while paragliding 6 days a week, I can still get stronger? This is perfect. Like, as I feel. I've actually got a question, because I think in this case, I'm kind of curious, how much do we feel like knowing your own limits actually holds you back because you feel constrained by your sort of self-imposed limits. Because I think this is a rare example where in some ways being a Gumby actually helps.
Dude.
Because you're like, who knows? Let's just go try that route over there. And you just try, and occasionally you exceed your own expectations and you stick something. And I'm including myself in this category because I'm sort of, and I think for me and J-Star, we've just been climbing so long that there's like so much data backing it up where you're like, I've done so many routes of this grade and so many routes of that grade and whatever. And so you start to sort of build your own limitations where you're like, well, this is what I can do. And you sort of put yourself into your own box. But
totally,
I think about this sometimes with other friends in our life where I'm like, I wish I could just run their life for a little while, like make all their decisions for them for just a few weeks because I could really get them on track. And it makes you wonder if somebody else could just sort of hijack your system and use your body to climb the way they want for a season, if they could actually squeeze more out of you by just doing it a totally different way. Being like, oh yeah, just like be fast and loose and try your best and see what happens. And I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, if you step totally outside of your own box, you were suddenly able to do things that that you wouldn't have foreseen.
What you've said, Alex, is 1000% true. And I've observed this a million times. And that is that, like, when you're in your early 20s or your mid 20s or whatever, or even in your teens, and you're hyping fit and you've never experienced a bad season, or you've never like had a project. Like I sometimes I go to the crag and I overhear younger climbers talking, and you know, it's always this like kind of banter of like, oh, next try for sure, tomorrow, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow, it's like no problem. And it's like it's the kind of thing that like I know that me and my peers of a similar age and experience would like never say. And it's not to say that they're arrogant, it's just to say that they've never like come to the crag feeling 1000% certain that they were going to send, and then something happened. Maybe like they got an enormous flapper on their finger, or they actually just had a stomach ache, or actually it turns out that they just sucked when they thought that they were going to be awesome. And I think that like while having that wealth of experience over the course of decades of climbing and pushing yourself can help you through those moments, that's where I think it benefits, because we both know that we can have like a bad week or a bad try and still come back and send, because we've had every kind of experience there is with like a big project, you know. But I do think that there's something about that like ignorance almost, where they're young, they're freaking strong, piping fit, and it's like everything they've ever tried is easy. So why wouldn't this be? And so it's like, why wouldn't I did one 13D. Why wouldn't I try a 14B? Like why? Like 13D was easy. 14B is only a little bit harder, you know? And sometimes I kind of wish I had that. But man, there have been way too many times in my life when even all the data would suggest that it should feel easy. And then I show up and I'm like, man, I can't do this.
It's been, in some ways, this is like our middle-aged episode of Climbing Gold. This is like we've been doing this too long. Maybe we should rebrand this one Climbing Silver, for like silverbacks. Just talking about, it's like, welcome to Climbing Silver.
Yeah, the question of the day is it imposter syndrome or is it middle age? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, hold on. Wait. I want to make it really clear that Alex, you might be graduating to middle age now that you have a whole family and there's 2 children, and I think you sleep 3 hours a night, but I am still young and fit and I'm on an upward trajectory, all right? I'm 38, but I'm staring down 25.
So Jonathan, I'm going to be pointed about this last question. I know you aren't comfortable thinking of yourself as like one of the strongest climbers in the world, but the data clearly says that you have had incredible success in this sport, that you have reached the sort of upper limits of it, and you have been a part of the movement in the last decade towards, reaching the current level of human potential in the sport. And if you can take a step back for a moment, like, why do you think you've had success? Because you don't end up where you're at by accident.
I've never been or thought of myself as being one of the strongest climbers in the world. Like that, just like factually, that's just simply not true. But what I do have that I maybe see that even stronger people than me don't have is tenacity. And I am pretty good at showing up repeatedly, even when the circumstances aren't perfect, or, my feeling isn't perfect or whatever. And so like, that's where some of my strength comes from, is that like ability to continuously be there and show up and continuously try my hardest over and over and over again in the face of like something that might be really hard. And so I know that that's a strength of mine, but I'm also very aware of the fact that like physically, you know, some of these things might quite honestly be beyond what I'm capable of, you know? So I just have to like find the right balance between those two things.
Thanks, Jonathan, for joining us again. His new film, Passion, will be out later this summer. Follow us on Instagram at Climbing Gold, or Jonathan for that matter, for updates. Climbing Gold is a production of Duct Tape Then Beer. Alex Honnold is our host and chief technical advisor and tech support. Thanks, Alex. Our production and editing team includes the talents of Lauren Delaney-Miller, Marco Seiler Gonzalez, and Evan Phillips. Skylar Perwins is our YouTube and social media editor. Music today by Brendan O'Connell. Tracks are courtesy of the Artists or Track Club. Our creative director is me, Fitz Cahall. Our executive producers are Jonathan Retzik and Ben Endy for ArcStar Sports, and Lisi Hendricks and Becca Call for Duct Tape Then Beer. Thanks for listening.